Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be, and welcome to a science post, but it's going to be not on physics. Something related, though. It's called Entangled Meanings and Mental Decline. Back in the 1990s, there was a lot of press about a postulated link between mad cow disease and several incidents of unexplained rapid mental decline in people who seemed otherwise healthy. Several thousand cows got sick from bad food, and a few people had rapid mental degeneration for unexplained reasons. And the people were wondering if this was a disease caused by the cows, or if the disease was only there when you were looking for it. Because it's very difficult to diagnose what causes mental decline in many cases. The evil culprit in the news media was called a prion, a type of unmeasurably tiny protein that acted as an infectious agent within brain matter. In the media, it was depicted as something smaller and more mysterious than a virus, yet more dangerous. If it made it through the blood-brain barrier via inhalation or through mysterious digestive processes that would ordinarily prevent molecules of such size from causing trouble, you were toast. That was the media perspective, but from a more scientific perspective, the prion was a rather hand-waving explanation for some unexplained cases of dementia, when the truth is that we often don't know why someone's brain is falling apart. When we can't know what causes something, people often invent an invisible, unmeasurable agent to explain it. Phlogiston is a good classical example. But modern physicists invent unmeasurable things all the time, so why can't biologists do it? From a scientific perspective, identifying when a brain disease is caused by an infectious agent and when it is caused by an environmental poison is difficult. If a group of cows falls ill after eating the same food, one says that it was a poison. But if only a portion of the cows falls ill, one says it was an infection. But I'm not sure that this distinction is valid when not all cows are equally susceptible to a given poison. Perhaps some of the cows ate a sufficient quantity of an herbal antidote during their trip to the pasture, while others didn't get a daily dose of greenery. The reason I now think the mad cow disease scare was a case of poisoning rather than infection is because the cows who got sick had been fed a form of superheated compost made up of plant matter and dead sheep. Yes, that's right, dead sheep. Now, the last time I checked, cows were herbivores, and that leads me to suspect that feeding them the fatty acids from overcooked dead sheep might cause them to develop a case of rapid mental decline. After all, it is common knowledge that in humans, certain types of fats are healthier for our brains and others are more poisonous in high doses. Consider the comparison between regular proteins and deadly prions. I recommend clicking on the blog post link below to take a look at some of the technical photographs. They look very similar. And after a convenient redefinition, you can say that prions are everywhere. But then somehow only the damaged prions are the ones that cause trouble. It's very, very strange. A deadly prion is just a regular protein that has been damaged by something. That would be what it looks like. But what damages a protein? Heat. What causes heat in a brain? Electrical resistance. What causes resistance? Tangles in place of orderly coils. What causes enough heat to damage a protein? Too many tangled proteins or molecules. Thus, the loop is closed and a cascade of destruction can take hold. Yet there are other instigators. What is a tangled molecule that is bad for brain health? A long-chain fatty acid. What is the longest fatty chain acid around? Microplastics. Do brains like being gummed up with burnt, tangled proteins and fats? Probably not. Are these natural byproducts of life? Probably. But if too much burnt junk accumulates, is there a cascade of irreversible damage? Sounds likely. Can keeping your head cool stop the cascade? Maybe sometimes. So I recommend the pictures in the blog post below. Is the partially digested plastic found in the tissue of a fish or an animal that ate some bad fats or plastics the same thing as a disease-causing prion? Maybe. There is an epidemic of unexplained dementia in Japan at the moment, and it might be attributed to pollution of the fish, with microplastics perhaps. This leads me to conclude that prions are not infectious agents like viruses. They are poisonous agents like overheated fats or partially digested plastics, and like all poisons, the dosage and accumulation is critical. Once you hit a tipping point, a poison will burn holes in your head, and you won't recover. I mean, we're all going to die, but I'd rather not die from a head full of burnt fat or plastic. So how do we get these bad fats or plasticky burnt up junk out of our brains? Sleep is when cerebrospinal fluid flows more rapidly and washes away debris. What do we not get enough of when we are overworked and stressed out? Sleep. What is a known cause of breast cancer? Lack of sleep in young women. Do plastics also and bad fats also get stuck in breast tissue, causing trouble? So I'm getting off topic. There would, of course, be no corporate incentive to let us in on the details of this little story about prions and plastics and burnt fats, because prions are a great way to encourage us to eat less meat without scaring all of us too much about overwork and plastic in the ecosystem, something that we really can't get rid of overnight without changing our entire clothing industry. Just think about all of those nice fleece plastic clothes we wear. I doubt that we are discouraged from eating meat because corporations love animals so much, but rather because when commercial phosphate is widely available, eating animals is less energy efficient than eating plants. And corporations are always trying to increase the efficiency of human systems. Truth doesn't matter that much when it comes to the bottom line, and either way, if there is a lower concentration of partially digested plastic in vegetables, you are better off eating vegetables in place of contaminated meat. So I'm sure you are skeptical of my reasoning, as you should be, but if this little video causes some young person to investigate these systems on a fundamental level, and not just blindly trust in published literature, I feel like I've made a good contribution to the world today, because you really do have to dig down to the basics to understand what's going on. There's a lot of noise in the narratives that are being spread today. A lazy thinker would just dismiss all of this as conspiracy thinking, but I think he would be missing the method to my madness. My first assumption is that smart people are lazy thinkers, incredibly lazy thinkers, who think they are smart. Sorry. They're lazy thinkers, and all one has to do to get closer to the truth is to identify the sorts of mental shortcuts that people who think they are smart tend to make. I do not think that there is a conspiracy to make these sorts of sloppy errors. I just think that opportunists are happy to exploit them for their own ends without caring whether or not they are true. So maybe some of these opportunists recognize that they are using a lie to achieve an end, and that would make them conspiratorial. But I doubt that plays much of a role in how these examples of faulty scientific reasoning come about. When I do my conspiracy theorizing or sloppy reasoning investigations, I always consult a few primary sources and spend a moment decoding the jargon. But here again I see evidence of tangled, faulty thinking that is disguised by a verbose style. Just as tangled proteins or fatty acids clog up our brains and make it hard to think clearly, lengthy tangles of acronyms and overdefined words make it hard to think rationally. So I'm going to try to read an article about prions in the jargon, in the language in which it is expressed, and just to give you a sample of how unnecessarily complex the language can sometimes be. Prion diseases are subacute neurodegenerative diseases that affect humans and some domestic and free-ranging animals. Infectious prion agents are considered to comprise solely of abnormally folded isoforms of the cellular prion protein known as PRPSC. Pathology during prion disease is restricted to the central nervous system, where it causes extensive neurodegeneration and ultimately leads to the death of the host. The first half of this review provides a thorough account of our understanding of the various ways in which PRPSC prions may spread between individuals within a population, both horizontally and vertically. Many natural prion diseases are acquired peripherally, such as by oral exposure, lesions to skin or mucous membranes, and possibly also via the nasal cavity. Following peripheral exposure, some prions accumulate to high levels within the secondary lymphoid organs as they make their journey from the site of the infection to the brain, a process termed neuroinvasion. The replication of PRPSC prions within the secondary lymphoid organs is important for their efficient spread to the brain. The second half of this review describes the key tissues, cells, and molecules which are involved in the propagation of PRPSC prions from peripheral sites of exposure, such as the lumen of the intestine to the brain. This section also considers how additional factors such as inflammation and aging might influence prion disease susceptibility. So I always believe the measurements, but I don't always believe scientists' conclusions, because they very often take assumptions as settled fact. Many stories about prions seem like assumptions that slowly turned into settled facts, despite poor scientific methodology. Somebody even became convinced that he could trace these burnt-up proteins to snails and ants. So there's a picture that, it makes me feel doubtful about that particular person's reasoning. Pretty pictures are easy to draw based on half-baked speculations. Perhaps the pictures were inspired by some plausible stories about toxoplasmosis and how it changes our behavior. I, for one, believe in toxoplasmosis since it can be easily imaged with a microscope. But prions are very small. They are impossible to see directly, and the protein reconstruction measurements can be done in a very doubtful way, a way that you should not trust. So my father died of Lewy body dementia. It's a disease that is not unlike all of these other neurodegenerative diseases involving tangles of damaged proteins that cause the mind to fall apart. He maintained his ability to reason and be himself to the very end, but he lost control over his body. I suppose that I am telling this story right now because he was the person who encouraged me to become a scientist, and I remember that when I brought him a Newsweek article about mad cow disease back in the 1990s, he was the person who pointed out to me that prions were just a postulated cause and not a definitive cause of unexplained degenerative mental disease. He pointed out to me that many times we don't know what caused someone's rapid decline, and this has certainly proven to be the case with him. So, and I only know that he was struck down prematurely at age 71 and that his career killed him. Either it could have been heavy metal poisoning from working with gadolinium as a radiologist. It could have been infection with something from a patient's cerebral spinal fluid, these magical prions. It could have been toxic exposure during work in a chemistry lab when he was in his 20s. It could have been a leaky roof that caused a mycotoxin fungus to covertly take over his ceiling. It could have been a chronic exposure to hospital food. It could have been a career spent in rotating shifts and chronic sleep deprivation. It could have been 20 years of antidepressant medication used to keep himself working despite knowledge that something about his lifestyle was not sustainable. So I'm telling you this today in his honor because I don't want his sacrifices to be in vain. He worked so hard. He was a neuroradiologist. He lived, and when he got sick, he went in the machine that he was operating and saw exactly what was wrong with his brain. It was very tragic. He lived in accordance with his principles, and he was not the sort of person to regret the choices he made. Those choices made him the man he was, and that man was someone who gave his life to creating the things he wanted to see in the world today. He made me who I am today, and he contributed to the development of the medical system that took good care of him when he got sick. Despite the flaws in that system, I believe he contributed to something good and left the world a better place than he found it. So I will conclude this post about prions, burnt plastic, burnt fats, the many ways we poison our brains, the importance of sleep, and the importance of looking at things on a fundamental level and being skeptical. I thank you for watching. I hope it gave you some food for thought and caused you to want to look into things on a fundamental level yourself. Until next time.